7th, 1692, 11:43 a.m. The morning heat in Port Royal, Jamaica, is thick with the scent of salt water and rum. The clamor of the wealthiest, most decadent port in the Americas fills the air, a symphony of commerce and sin. Then, the ground begins to heat. Not a tremor, but a violent, liquid convulsion. In less than 3 minutes, the earth gives way, and the sea rushes in, swallowing whole streets, forts, and warehouses, erasing 2/3 of the city from existence. What was once the wickedest city on earth became a drowned ghost, its story silenced mid-sentence. But this is no simple tale of disaster. The ruins of Port Royal are a unique case file, a perfectly preserved crime scene locked in silt. Our task is not simply to document its fall, but to investigate the fatal flaw in its very foundation. Now, let us open the case file and begin the investigation. To understand how a city can be swallowed by the sea, we must first reconstruct the world that was lost. Port Royal was not born an ordinary settlement. It was forged as a geopolitical weapon. In the mid-17th century, the Caribbean was a battleground for empires. Spain, fat with the silver of the New World, dominated the seas. England, a rising power, sought to break that monopoly. Their chosen tool was not a foreign navy, but a strategic alliance with the buccaneers, privateers, and pirates who prowled these waters. The English crown offered Port Royal as a sanctuary, a safe harbor where these sea rovers could sell their plundered Spanish goods without fear of reprisal. The city was built on a long, narrow spit of sand called the Palisados, a natural deep-water harbor perfectly positioned to control the shipping lanes to the Spanish Main. From here, legendary figures like Captain Henry Morgan launched devastating raids, returning not with goods for trade, but with chests overflowing with pieces of 8 and gold doubloons. The city's economy became a torrent of stolen wealth. In its heyday, Port Royal was arguably the richest and most morally bankrupt city in the Americas. Contemporary accounts describe it as the Sodom of the New World, a place where the wages of sin were spent with reckless abandon. If we could walk its streets in 1691, the year before the Cataclysm, we would be met with an astonishing spectacle. This was no ramshackle frontier town. Grand brick houses, some 4 stories high, stood shoulder to shoulder with raucous taverns and opulent brothels, their architecture mimicking the grand styles of London. The air would be a thick brew of humidity. Spilt rum, tar, and gunpowder. The sounds were a cacophony, the clatter of wagons on cobblestones, the shouts of merchants in a dozen languages, and the ever-present roar of drunken revelry spilling from its infamous tippling houses, 1 for every 10 residents. Warehouses along the waterfront, known as the Thames Street of Jamaica, bulged with silk, spices, and precious metals. Wealth was so common that even the poorest artisans used silver platters, and pirates were known to shoe their horses with gold. But as we retrace this city's blueprint, we uncover a fatal design flaw, one hidden in plain sight. The very geography that made Port Royal a strategic masterpiece also made it an engineering nightmare. The entire metropolis, with its heavy brick structures and dense population, rested upon just 60 acres of unconsolidated, water-saturated sand and gravel. As the city grew richer, its construction became more ambitious and more reckless. Land was reclaimed from the harbor in heavy forts, were built directly on the unstable spit. We must ask, in the frantic pursuit of wealth, did anyone stop to consider the ground beneath their feet? It was a city built on a liquid foundation, a gilded metropolis balanced on a knife's edge. This was not merely a city, it was an accident waiting to happen, a bubble of prosperity that was about to be burst by a force far more powerful than any imperial navy. The investigation into Port Royal's demise begins not in the water, but deep within the Earth's crust. Jamaica sits astride a volatile tectonic boundary, the meeting point of the Caribbean and North American plates. For centuries, immense stress had been accumulating along a massive fracture known as the Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault Zone, a sleeping giant running just south of the island. At 11:43 a.m. on that June morning, the giant awoke. The fault ruptured, unleashing a catastrophic earthquake, estimated today at a magnitude of 7.5. The initial shock wave was violent, but it was the second and third tremors, arriving in rapid succession, that sealed the city's fate. Eyewitnesses described the ground swelling and rolling like the sea. But this was not a conventional earthquake. Shaking alone cannot sink a city. To understand what happened next, we must examine the very soil on which Port Royal was built. The city's foundation, that spit of waterlogged sand and gravel, was its Achilles heel. The intense seismic vibrations triggered a terrifying geological phenomenon: soil liquefaction. When we subject loose, saturated granular material to intense shaking, the water pressure between the grains increases dramatically. This pressure pushes the grains apart, causing the soil to lose its structural integrity and behave not as a solid, but as a dense, viscous fluid. For the residents of Port Royal, the solid ground beneath their feet ceased to exist. It became a slurry of mud and water. This is the central mechanism of the city's destruction. The grand four-story brick houses, weighing hundreds of tons, lost their footings and began to sink vertically, as if being lowered into quicksand. The ground opened into wide fissures, swallowing entire streets and the people on them. The waterfront, the city's commercial heart, was the first to go. The land simply slumped and slid forward into the harbor in a massive landslide, taking the finest warehouses and forts with it. In minutes, 33 acres of the most densely populated real estate in the New World vanished beneath the waves. The cataclysm was so swift, so total, that it created an almost perfect time capsule, an underwater archaeological site unlike any other on Earth. Our investigation now moves beneath the surface of Kingston Harbor, into the silent, murky world where the evidence lay preserved. For over 300 years, layers of silt settled over the ruins, creating an anaerobic environment, one devoid of oxygen, that halted the normal processes of decay. This has allowed for the recovery of astonishingly well-preserved organic materials, from leather shoes to wooden beams. Maritime archaeology here is not the study of decay, but the forensic analysis of frozen moments. The most poignant piece of evidence recovered is a simple brass pocket. Watch. Its hand stopped at 11:43 a.m., the exact moment the earthquake struck, corroborating the historical accounts with chilling precision. Divers have uncovered entire buildings that sank upright, their contents undisturbed. In one tavern, stacks of pewter plates and onion bottles remain where they were left on the shelf. In another building, a kitchen was found with a pot still resting on a fireplace hearth. These are not mere artifacts. They are snapshots of life interrupted. When we analyze these finds, we are bearing witness to the last ordinary moments of thousands of people, their daily routines fossilized by disaster. In the modern era, our investigative tools have grown more powerful. Using high-resolution side-scan sonar and bathymetric surveys, we can now pierce the gloom of the harbor and map the ghost city below. The data provides a ghostly blueprint of the submerged landscape, revealing the outlines of collapsed buildings and the grid of lost streets. We can digitally trace the path of the submarine landslide and differentiate the areas that slid away from those that simply subsided. This technology allows us to see the full, citywide scale of the liquefaction event, confirming the eyewitness accounts and the story told by the artifacts. The evidence is conclusive. Port Royal was not washed away by a tsunami, nor did it crumble over time. It was swallowed whole by the earth itself, a victim of a rare and perfect storm of geology, geography, and human ambition. The case file on the sinking of Port Royal can now be closed. The verdict is not one of divine retribution, as was claimed by so many in the 17th century, but of a catastrophic convergence of geology and human hubris. Our investigation has shown that the city's fate was sealed the moment its first brick was laid upon the unstable sands of the Palisados. The combination of unconsolidated, water-saturated ground and its immediate proximity to a major tectonic fault created a geological death trap. The earthquake of 1692 was not the sole killer. It was merely the trigger. The true cause of destruction was soil liquefaction, a phenomenon that turned the city's very foundation against it. In the aftermath, Port Royal acquired a new identity, one that continues to define its legacy, the Pompeii of the New World. Like its Roman counterpart, the city offers a moment of life frozen in time, but its preservation underwater, rather than volcanic ash, provides a unique and invaluable window into the past. On land, cities evolve. Old buildings are torn down, foundations are replaced, and the material culture of one era is paved over by the next. Port Royal was spared this evolution. The submerged ruins represent the single greatest collection of in situ 17th century English colonial artifacts in the world. It is a sealed-off environment, an unparalleled laboratory for understanding the daily realities of life in the early days of empire. Ultimately, the ghost city of Port Royal serves as a profound cautionary tale. It is a monument to the fragility of human ambition in the face of planetary forces. The wealth, power, and decadence that defined the city were rendered meaningless in 3 short minutes. Its story forces us to consider the foundations of our own modern cities, many of which are built in seismically active zones or on vulnerable coastlines. Port Royal is more than just a historical curiosity or an archaeological treasure. It is a permanent and chilling reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not guaranteed, and that nature will always have the final say in the histories we attempt to build. The story of Port Royal reminds us that the past is never truly gone, but merely sleeping in hidden places. For 3 centuries, the ocean that claimed the city in a moment of fury became its silent, patient archivist, holding the memory of every life and every object within its cold embrace, waiting for us to look beneath the surface and listen to the tales it holds.